Liberal Viewer presents.
So earlier this month, when Bill O'Reilly caught Reverend Jeremiah Wright getting the date of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima wrong, O'Reilly not only spent airtime correcting him, but ended up erring himself, as you can see in this clip.
Last Sunday, his former pastor, Reverend Wright, once again attacked America in the Trinity Church.
Today is December 7th, the day that this government killed over 80,000 Japanese civilians at Hiroshima in 1941.
Well, in addition to getting the day wrong, December 7th is the day Japan attacked the USA, and the year wrong, it was 1945 when we dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. Wright again makes the absurd point that America is a bad country for using the atom bomb on Japan, an action that actually saved hundreds of thousands of lives because we didn't have to invade.
Now, I didn't actually hear Reverend Wright say America is a bad country in that clip, but even if he did, there's nothing absurd about questioning the necessity or even the morality of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. In fact, coincidentally, it was exactly 20 years ago this week that I wrote a paper in one of the courses I took to get my undergraduate history degree, showing that, at least in hindsight, the strong weight of the evidence supports an argument that the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were morally wrong, politically harmful, and militarily unnecessary. The immorality of killing and irradiating thousands of civilians is pretty apparent, and the harmful political consequences of the bombings, like helping spark a decades-long arms race with the Soviet Union, are even clearer now than they were when I wrote my paper 20 years ago. But the real weight of the evidence argues against O'Reilly's claim that the bombing saved lives by getting a Japanese surrender without an invasion. To begin with, as I point out in my paper, the American government had broken the Japanese codes and was well aware of Japan's attempts at peace overtures through Russian channels in mid-July of 1945. One decoded Japanese cable read, quote, "Japan is defeated. We must face that fact and act accordingly," unquote. And in addition to Japan's readiness to surrender, there's other evidence a little more diplomacy could have gotten that surrender without either atomic bombings or invasion. For example, the Potsdam Declaration in July 1945 demanding Japanese surrender did not tell the Japanese they could keep their emperor, even though the Japanese were allowed to keep their emperor, and even though Secretary of War Henry Stimson advised in a memo before the Potsdam Declaration, quote, "If in saying this we should add that we do not exclude a constitutional monarchy under her present dynasty, it would substantially add to the chances of acceptance," unquote. It was for these and other reasons that historian Robert J. Butow, after exhaustively studying all the Japanese documents, wrote in 1954, quote, "Had the Allies given the Prince Kanoi a week of grace in which to obtain his government's support for acceptance of the proposals, the war might have ended toward the latter part of July or the very beginning of the month of August without the atomic bomb and without Soviet participation in the conflict," unquote. Which leads me to my questions, but in this video, courtesy of Army-Navy magazine circa 1946, it's not just me, it's atomic power asking the questions, as you can see in this final clip.
Atomic power puts the question squarely to mankind.
So what do you think? First, for those who've studied the historical record, at least in hindsight, doesn't the strong weight of the evidence support an argument that the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were morally wrong, politically harmful, and militarily unnecessary? And given the nature of the atomic bombings apparent even in that grainy old footage, shouldn't Americans in general, and Bill O'Reilly in particular, be more circumspect about being the only nation in the history of the world to purposely subject other human beings to atomic bombings?
YouTube, you decide.